Good evening, and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. Before we begin tonight's story, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment if you want more true horror stories to accompany you before sleep. Your support keeps these stories alive in the dark. Now listen carefully. Some houses are built with wood and nails. Others are built with secrets. And a few are built with something that never leaves. If you ever drive through Amityville, New York, along Ocean Avenue, there is a house that looks quiet, almost welcoming. White walls. Dark shutters. A calm canal behind it. But what happened inside that house in the winter of 1975 left scars on American history that time has never erased. This is the true story of the Lutz family terror. It was late afternoon on December 18, 1975, when George Lutz unlocked the front door of 112 Ocean Avenue. The air outside was cold, sharp, and heavy with the smell of the nearby water. Inside, the house was silent. Too silent. As if it had been holding its breath, waiting. George was 30 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard that made him look older than he was. Behind him stood his wife Kathleen, known to friends as Kathy, wrapped in a long winter coat. With them were Kathy's 3 children from a previous marriage. Dane, age 9. Missy, age 7. And little Mark, only 5. They were excited. Nervous. This house was a dream they never thought they could afford. 6 bedrooms. A finished basement. A boathouse. All for a price that felt like a miracle. The real estate agent had told them why. 1 year earlier, on a cold night in November 1974, a man named Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered 6 members of his own family inside these walls. Parents. Brothers. Sisters. All shot while they slept. The Lutz family believed they could live with the history. They believed a fresh start could erase old blood. They were wrong. The first night passed with only unease. Subtle things. The house creaked more than expected. Cold drafts slipped through rooms that should have been warm. George noticed the furnace struggling, even though it had been inspected days before. At 3:15 in the morning, George woke suddenly. His eyes snapped open without warning. The bedroom was dark, yet he felt watched. He rolled over and glanced at the digital clock beside the bed. 3:15. He did not know it yet, but that was the exact time the DeFeo murders had occurred. From that night forward, George woke at 3:15 every morning. No alarm. No sound. Just a deep, instinctive pull from sleep into fear. Within days, the house began to change. A strange smell filled the hallway near the basement. It was not rot, not smoke. It was sweet and sour at the same time, like decay mixed with perfume. George scrubbed the walls. Kathy opened windows even in freezing weather. The smell always returned. One evening, while unpacking boxes, Kathy heard Missy talking softly in her bedroom. When asked who she was speaking to, Missy smiled and said it was her new friend. Her name was Jody. Kathy asked where Jody was. Missy pointed to the corner of the room and said she liked to watch them sleep. George laughed it off at first. Imaginary friends were common. But that night, he stood outside the house and looked up. In Missy's bedroom window, 2 small red eyes stared back at him. Unblinking. Animal. Intelligent. He told no one. As the days passed, George became someone else. He grew irritable. Short-tempered. His body felt heavy, as if gravity inside the house was stronger. He began chopping wood obsessively, even when there was no need. He stopped going to work. He sat alone in the boathouse for hours, staring into the black water. Kathy noticed bruises appearing on her body. Long, dark marks on her arms and chest. She did not remember hitting anything. She did not remember falling. The marks faded and returned, again and again. One night, snow fell hard against the windows. The power went out just after midnight. The house dropped into darkness and cold. From the basement came a sound. A low, wet slamming. Like something heavy being thrown against the walls. George grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs. Each step groaned beneath him. The air grew colder with every breath. When he reached the bottom, the sound stopped. The walls were covered in a thick black substance. Oozing. Dripping. Alive. George screamed and ran. A local priest named Father Ray Mancuso was invited to bless the house. He arrived on December 26, 1975, carrying holy water and a Bible. As he walked through the rooms, he felt an intense pressure in his chest. When he entered one of the upstairs bedrooms, a male voice whispered violently behind him. "Get out." Father Mancuso fled the house, shaken. That night, blisters formed on his hands. He refused to return. The children grew pale. Sick. Dane claimed something climbed into his bed at night and pressed on his chest until he could not breathe. Mark screamed in his sleep. Missy began drawing pictures of a horned figure with red eyes. Kathy dreamed of the DeFeo murders. She saw the bodies. Felt the gunshots. Woke covered in sweat at 3:15 every morning. On January 14, 1976, the house reached its breaking point. That night, the temperature inside dropped suddenly. Frost formed on the walls. The sounds returned, louder than ever. Doors slammed. Windows shook. George felt an overwhelming urge to stay, to protect the house, to never leave. Kathy saw it differently. She saw George standing in the dark hallway, his face twisted with rage, whispering words that were not his own. She gathered the children. They ran. Barefoot. Half-dressed. Into the freezing night. They never returned. 28 days. That is how long the Lutz family survived inside 112 Ocean Avenue. After they left, investigators, reporters, and skeptics flooded the house. Some felt nothing. Others reported cold spots, voices, and a crushing sense of dread. The house still stands. People still live there. But even now, locals avoid stopping near it at night. And if you wake suddenly at 3:15 in the morning, heart racing for no reason at all, you might wonder. Was it ever just a house? Or did something inside it choose them? And is it still waiting? The weeks after the Lutz family fled Amityville were filled with silence, but it was not the peaceful kind. It was the silence that follows a scream, the kind that lingers in the air long after everyone has gone. Snow covered the front steps of 112 Ocean Avenue, undisturbed, as if the house itself wished to be left alone. George Lutz tried to return to normal life. He told friends the experience was stress, exhaustion, imagination fueled by rumors. Yet every night, no matter where he slept, he woke at 3:15. Hotels. Friends' couches. A small apartment far from the canal. The same moment, again and again. His heart would pound, his mouth dry, his ears ringing as if something had just whispered his name. Kathy fared no better. She felt watched in mirrors. She avoided dark rooms. Loud noises made her flinch. The children refused to sleep alone. Dane slept with the lights on, clutching a blanket soaked with sweat. Missy stopped talking about Jody, but sometimes she would stare into corners and shake her head, as if answering questions no one else could hear. News spread quickly. America was fascinated. A family fleeing their dream home after less than a month. A house with a violent past. Journalists called it hysteria. Psychologists suggested mass suggestion. But others listened more carefully. Paranormal investigators entered the house in early 1976. They brought cameras, recording equipment, notebooks. On the first night, one investigator reported feeling sudden rage, an urge to smash the equipment against the wall. Another felt intense nausea when standing near the basement stairs. Photographs taken inside later revealed strange shapes. Faces where no faces should be. A small boy with glowing eyes peering from the shadows. The basement became the center of attention. The smell returned. The walls felt damp even when dry. One investigator claimed the floor felt warm beneath his feet, unnaturally warm, as if heat rose from deep underground. Neighbors whispered stories they had never shared before. Dogs refusing to walk past the house. Strange lights seen in the windows long before the Lutz family arrived. A sense that the land itself was wrong. One elderly neighbor recalled that the land had once belonged to a local native tribe who avoided it, believing it to be a place of suffering. Another claimed early settlers had used the area as a holding site for the sick and the dying. Whether true or not, the house absorbed every story, every fear, every accusation. George eventually admitted something he had kept hidden. During those 28 days, he had felt compelled to walk through the house at night, checking windows, doors, rooms. Not to protect his family, but to protect the house itself. He felt as if it belonged to him, as if it needed him. And worse, he admitted that on some nights, he felt anger toward the children. A sudden, sharp thought that frightened him so deeply he refused to speak it aloud. Years passed. The Lutz family moved on, but the house did not. New owners came and went. Some stayed only months. Others reported nothing at all. Skeptics used this as proof that the haunting was exaggerated or fabricated. Yet even among those who denied the supernatural, many admitted the house felt heavy, oppressive, difficult to explain. In the early 1980s, renovations were made. Windows were changed. The famous attic was sealed. The red eyes were never seen again, at least not by anyone willing to speak publicly. But the clock remained. More than one resident reported waking suddenly in the night, heart racing, only to glance at the time and feel a chill crawl down their spine. 3:15. The DeFeo murders were never forgotten. Ronald DeFeo Jr. remained in prison, claiming voices had driven him to kill. Voices that told him his family was in danger. Voices that came from the house. Some believe the house feeds on tragedy. Others believe it reflects what is brought into it. A mirror for fear. A vessel for violence. And some believe the house is alive. If you stand across the canal at night and look at the windows, you might notice how dark they are. Darker than they should be. As if light does not behave normally inside. As if it is swallowed. The Lutz family rarely spoke publicly after the media storm faded. When asked if they would ever return, Kathy's answer was always the same. Some doors should never be opened again. Yet the house remains. Quiet. Waiting. Because places like that do not need to chase you. They only need you to come inside once. And if you are listening to this story late at night, if the room around you feels just a little colder, if the silence feels heavier than before, remember this. Not every horror ends when you leave the house. Some follow you. And some never let go. Years slipped by, but the shadow of 112 Ocean Avenue never loosened its grip. The house became a name whispered at dinner tables, debated on late-night radio, argued about in books and courtrooms. Some called it a hoax. Others called it the most documented haunting in American history. The truth sat somewhere darker, quieter, and far less comfortable. George Lutz aged quickly. Friends noticed how his beard turned gray earlier than expected. His eyes carried a constant tension, as if he were always listening for a sound only he could hear. He avoided long hallways and refused to sleep with doors closed. When storms rolled in, he became restless, pacing as if the weather itself was a warning. On one occasion, while staying at a lakeside cabin in another state, George woke suddenly and felt the same pressure on his chest he had felt in Amityville. The room smelled faintly of that same sickly sweetness. When he turned on the lamp, the feeling vanished, but the clock glowed beside the bed. 3:15. Kathy tried to rebuild a sense of normalcy. She focused on routines, on the children's schooling, on simple comforts. Yet she could never shake the feeling that something had attached itself to them. She sometimes sensed a presence standing just outside her bedroom door, not entering, not knocking, simply waiting. When she whispered prayers, the feeling retreated, but never fully disappeared. The children grew older, but their memories did not fade. Dane developed a fear of confined spaces. Mark avoided basements entirely. Missy, once cheerful and imaginative, became withdrawn. She stopped drawing altogether. When asked why, she said the pictures still watched her after she finished them. Investigators continued to visit the Amityville house over the decades. Some arrived confident and left shaken. Others left smug, claiming nothing happened. But a pattern emerged. Those who stayed overnight reported vivid dreams. Those who mocked the house felt sudden emotional swings. Anger. Sadness. Paranoia. Feelings that did not feel like their own. One investigator recorded a low humming sound near the basement late one night. It was not mechanical. It did not match any known source. When the recording was played back later, a faint voice could be heard beneath the hum, repeating a phrase too distorted to understand clearly, but filled with unmistakable hostility. The land itself seemed complicit. Animals avoided the area near the canal behind the house. Birds rarely perched on the roof. Even insects appeared scarce during certain seasons, as if something in the air warned them away. In the late 1990s, a family who lived in the house briefly reported hearing footsteps above them while the attic remained sealed. They reported doors opening on their own, not violently, but carefully, as if guided by intention. They left without giving interviews, without seeking attention, without explanation. Skeptics pointed to psychological stress, to suggestion, to financial motives. Yet no explanation fully accounted for the consistency of certain details. The time. The basement. The feeling of being watched. The sense of pressure that did not belong to the body. George once confided to a close friend something he had never shared publicly. During the final night in the house, he felt a presence standing beside him, close enough to feel its cold. It did not speak in words. It shared an understanding. That the house wanted him to stay. That it would take care of everything if he simply let go. He said that terrified him more than anything else. Because it felt comforting. As years turned into decades, the Amityville house became quieter. Less visited. Less discussed. But quiet does not mean empty. People who pass by late at night sometimes report an overwhelming urge to slow down, to look, to stop. A sensation like being recognized. Like being remembered. The canal reflects the house perfectly on calm nights, turning it into a double image. Some claim that the reflection looks wrong, as if the windows are deeper, darker, hungrier. George Lutz passed away years later, carrying his experiences with him to the grave. Kathy spoke rarely of Amityville near the end of her life. When she did, she described it not as evil, but as unfinished. Something that was never satisfied. The house remains standing today, renovated, repainted, reshaped to appear ordinary. Children ride bicycles past it. Boats glide quietly along the water. Life continues. But there are moments, especially in winter, when the air grows unnaturally still. When sound feels muffled. When the house seems to lean inward, listening. And if you wake tonight for no reason at all, if your heart is racing and the room feels colder than it should, take a moment to look at the clock. If it reads 3:15, remember this. Some places do not exist to be understood. They exist to be endured. And some doors, once opened, never truly close. Long after the arguments faded and the headlines disappeared, the house continued its quiet routine. Seasons passed over it like slow breaths. Snow buried the steps. Spring rain darkened the shutters. Summer heat pressed against the walls, making the window sweat. Autumn leaves gathered in corners where no wind seemed able to reach. Through it all, the house endured, patient and unchanged in whatever way mattered most. Those who lived nearby learned to sense it. Not consciously, not in a way they could explain to visitors, but in a subtle instinct that guided their steps. Children did not linger in front of the gate. Couples walking dogs crossed the street without thinking about why. At night, when the neighborhood settled into sleep, the area around 112 Ocean Avenue felt slightly removed, as if sound itself hesitated to travel there. A local historian once attempted to catalog every known event tied to the house. He gathered court records, interviews, police reports, private letters. Over time, he noticed something unsettling. Accounts differed wildly on details, yet certain sensations were always described in nearly identical language. The air feels heavy. The silence feels crowded. Time feels wrong. He never finished the project. After spending several evenings reviewing materials alone, he reported vivid nightmares and a persistent feeling of being followed. He boxed the papers and stored them in his basement. Months later, a pipe burst directly above the boxes, destroying most of the work. He took it as a sign and never tried again. Occasionally, someone with no knowledge of the house would move in. They would speak openly about how beautiful it was, how the rumors were exaggerated. For a while, life would appear normal. Friends would visit. Laughter would spill onto the lawn. Lights would glow warmly in the windows. Then small things would begin. A door left open that everyone swore had been closed. A sudden cold draft in a room far from any window. A feeling of irritation that escalated too quickly, arguments sparked over nothing. Sleep became difficult. Dreams grew vivid, oppressive, filled with narrow hallways and unseen watchers. The clock remained faithful. 3:15. One former resident described waking at that hour to the sound of breathing that was not his own. Slow. Deliberate. Close. When he sat up, the sound stopped. The room was empty. The sensation lingered, as if whatever had been there had simply stepped back, not gone. Another resident claimed the house reacted emotionally. When anger filled the rooms, the atmosphere grew heavier. When fear took hold, the house seemed to amplify it, pressing it inward until it felt unbearable. Joy, on the other hand, faded quickly, like warmth escaping through unseen cracks. Psychologists debated the power of suggestion. Sociologists discussed mass hysteria. Architects examined the structure for flaws that might explain drafts and noises. Each theory addressed part of the experience, but none accounted for the whole. Because the house did not behave like a puzzle waiting to be solved. It behaved like something with intent. At night, the canal behind the house reflected the sky like black glass. On certain evenings, when clouds covered the moon, the water appeared almost solid. Some claimed they saw movement beneath the surface, shadows shifting against the reflection of the house. No one stayed long enough to be certain. Those who researched the land records uncovered fragments of forgotten stories. Illness, displacement, hardship. Nothing dramatic on its own, but layered together, generation after generation, like sediment at the bottom of a river. Suffering had a way of settling there. The DeFeo murders remained the most violent chapter, but not the beginning. And perhaps not the end. There are those who believe the house does not create darkness, but gathers it. That it recognizes pain, fear, and anger, and stores them patiently. Waiting for the right moment, the right people, the right weakness. Visitors who enter the house today often comment on how normal it feels. Bright, renovated, clean. Yet many leave sooner than planned, citing headaches, unease, or an unshakable desire to be outside again. Few can explain why. Late at night, when traffic dies down and the neighborhood sleeps, the house listens. To the distant hum of the world. To the memories trapped within its walls. To the echo of footsteps that once fled in terror. And sometimes, very faintly, to the sound of someone waking abruptly, far away, staring at a glowing clock in the dark. 3:15. The house does not need them to return. It already knows them. It remembers the way fear tastes. It remembers the way hope sounds when it breaks. It remembers how easily people believe they are safe. And it waits. As the years continued to stretch forward, the house became something more than a structure or a story. It became a reference point, a quiet benchmark for fear in the American imagination. People argued about it on late-night call-in shows. College students debated it in psychology classes. Skeptics dismissed it with laughter that sounded forced even to their own ears. Yet the house never defended itself. It never needed to. A real estate photographer once spent a full afternoon inside, hired to capture new listing photos. He was alone, moving from room to room with professional detachment. Hours passed without incident. But as dusk approached, the light inside shifted strangely, bending shadows into longer shapes than the windows should allow. He felt a growing discomfort, a pressure behind his eyes. When he reviewed the photos later, one image stood out. In the hallway near the stairs, a dark form appeared behind the banister. It had no clear shape, only density. The photographer deleted the image immediately, then recovered it from the trash to delete it again. He said it felt wrong to keep it, like keeping a photograph of someone who did not want to be seen. He declined future work involving the property. Maintenance workers came and went. Some refused to enter the basement alone. One claimed tools would go missing and reappear hours later in different rooms. Another reported that the temperature would drop sharply whenever he stood near the lowest stair, as if cold air were being released deliberately. No one ever found a mechanical explanation that satisfied those who experienced it. Time did not soften the memories for those who had lived inside. The house had a way of resurfacing at unexpected moments. In dreams. In sudden emotional shifts. In the unexplained sense of being observed while completely alone. Missy, now an adult, once described a recurring dream. She stood in her childhood bedroom, watching moonlight spill across the floor. The room looked exactly as it had decades earlier. Clean. Quiet. Then she would notice the corner where Jody used to stand. Nothing was there. But the space felt occupied. In the dream, she would try to scream, only to realize she was not afraid. She was calm. Comforted. That realization always woke her in a panic, heart racing, breath shallow, fighting the memory of how easy it felt to belong there. The idea disturbed her more than any nightmare ever could. Others who had never set foot inside the house reported similar dreams after reading or hearing detailed accounts. Long hallways. Cold air. A presence that did not chase or threaten, but waited patiently, confidently. Almost lovingly. A former investigator once theorized that the house functioned like a psychological echo chamber. That intense events left impressions that could be reactivated by belief alone. But even he admitted there was something unusual about the consistency of those impressions across people with no connection to each other. The house seemed to speak the same language to everyone. In quiet moments, when nothing happened, that was when it felt strongest. Not during loud noises or dramatic events, but during stillness. When attention drifted. When minds opened without realizing it. That was when people felt the pull. A pull not toward violence, but toward surrender. To stop resisting. To stop questioning. To stay. The house never appeared angry. It did not rage or lash out. It did not need to. It allowed fear to bloom naturally, then watched what people did with it. Some ran. Some denied it. Some tried to understand it. And a few felt something dangerously close to peace. Late one winter night, a security camera installed outside the house recorded a brief anomaly. For several seconds, the image distorted. The house appeared slightly shifted, as if the angles no longer aligned with the street. Then everything returned to normal. Technicians blamed interference. Compression errors. Nothing worth investigating further. But neighbors noticed something else. For the next few nights, the house lights turned on by themselves at exactly the same time. 3:15. Room by room, slowly, until the house was fully illuminated. Then, just as slowly, the lights went dark again. No one was inside. The event never repeated. And the house returned to silence. Silence, however, did not mean inactivity. It meant listening. Listening to footsteps that never returned. Listening to stories told in hushed voices. Listening to hearts that raced in the dark for reasons they could not name. The house did not age the way other houses did. It did not seem to decay. Repairs blended seamlessly. Fresh paint never quite erased the sense of depth behind the walls, as if layers of time still existed beneath the surface. Like memories that refuse to fade. Some believe places can learn. That walls can remember voices. That floors can absorb footsteps. That ceilings can trap prayers and screams alike. If that is true, then 112 Ocean Avenue has learned much. It has learned patience. It has learned human weakness. It has learned how easily comfort can become control. And it has learned that belief is not required. All it needs is presence. Someone inside. Someone alone. Someone tired enough to stop questioning the cold, the silence, the weight in the air. Someone who wakes suddenly and looks at the clock. 3:15. Because that moment is not about time. It is about attention. And the house is always paying attention. Attention is what keeps the house alive. Not the kind drawn by headlines or cameras, but the quiet, inward focus of a mind alone in the dark. The moment when thought slows, when defenses soften, when fear does not yet have a name. That is when the house feels closest, even to those miles away. There are nights when former residents swear they smell the canal water again, sharp and cold, even while living far inland. Nights when the walls of their current homes feel thinner than they should. Nights when dreams blur into waking moments, and the memory of a staircase they have not seen in decades feels more real than the floor beneath their feet. The house does not send visions. It does not demand remembrance. It simply waits for recognition. In the years following the final renovations, a local utility worker was assigned to inspect meters along Ocean Avenue. He had no interest in the stories and little patience for superstition. He approached the property in broad daylight, clipboard in hand, humming quietly to himself. The moment he stepped onto the walkway, the humming stopped. He later described it as a physical sensation, like walking into thicker air. His thoughts slowed. His steps felt heavier. He completed his work quickly and left without looking back. That night, he dreamed of standing in a narrow hallway, unable to move forward or back. The walls felt warm. The air smelled sweet and rotten at the same time. When he woke, the dream faded quickly, but one detail remained. The time. 3:15. He dismissed it as coincidence. Everyone did. Coincidence is comforting. The house does not punish disbelief. It does not need to. Disbelief does not protect anyone. In some ways, it opens doors more easily than fear. A relaxed mind is easier to reach. A confident mind is slower to retreat. That is why the house feels strongest when least expected. A couple who once rented nearby reported an argument that escalated without reason. Words sharpened too quickly. Tempers flared over something trivial. Both later described feeling embarrassed by their own behavior, as if they had been briefly pushed toward anger by something external. They made up soon after, but neither could shake the feeling that the argument had not been entirely theirs. Across the canal, the house stood silent, windows dark, listening. Theories continued to circulate. Infrasound. Environmental stressors. Residual trauma embedded in architecture. Each theory offered a fragment of comfort, a way to frame the experience as manageable, explainable. But comfort does not equal truth. The truth, if there is one, may be simpler and more unsettling. Some places become good at holding things. Not objects, but states of mind. Fear. Rage. Despair. Hopelessness. They soak into the structure over time, deepening with every repetition. Eventually, the place does not just reflect those emotions. It recognizes them. Responds to them. Feeds on them. The house does not lure victims with visions of terror. It does not whisper threats or show its teeth. It offers something far more dangerous. Familiarity. The feeling that you have been here before. The sense that the space understands you. The illusion that you are not alone, and never were. That is why those who feel drawn to the house rarely describe fear at first. They describe curiosity. Calm. A strange sense of belonging. Only later does the weight appear. Only later does the pressure build. By the time fear arrives, it is already too late to pretend nothing is happening. In quiet moments, the house remembers everything that has passed through it. The echo of hurried footsteps. The muffled sobs behind closed doors. The sound of breathing in the dark when no one should be there. It remembers George standing alone in the hallway, torn between love and something colder. It remembers Kathy waking from dreams soaked in dread. It remembers children staring into corners, listening. It remembers. And memory, when left undisturbed long enough, begins to seek company. Sometimes that company is found far from Amityville. In a hotel room. In a suburban bedroom. In a quiet apartment where the city noise finally fades. Anywhere someone wakes abruptly, heart racing, breath shallow, mind fogged with a sense of presence. They check the time. 3:15. In that moment, the connection is complete. Not because the house has reached out, but because the person has reached inward. Into the same space where fear once lived. Into the same quiet where doubt gives way to instinct. The house does not travel. It does not have to. Its influence spreads through attention, through repetition, through stories told late at night when defenses are low. Every retelling strengthens the outline. Every listener adds a little more shape. The house exists where it is spoken of. And where it is remembered. This is why the story never ends. Why it refuses closure. Why even now, decades later, the name still carries weight. Because the house was never just a place. It was a moment. A moment frozen at 3:15 in the morning, stretched thin across years, waiting patiently for the next mind to wander too close. If you feel uneasy now, that is not coincidence. If the silence around you feels heavier, that is not imagination. If the darkness seems to listen back, that is not fear playing tricks. It is recognition. The house does not need to be seen to be present. It does not need belief to be real. It does not need victims to survive. It only needs attention. And now, for a moment, it has yours. Once attention is given, it does not vanish easily. It lingers, like an afterimage burned into the mind. Even when the story ends, even when the listener tells themselves it is only a story, something remains slightly misaligned. A sense that the world has shifted by a fraction too small to measure, yet large enough to feel. The house understands this better than anyone. It does not rush. It has learned that fear ripens slowly. That the most lasting impressions are made gently, without force. A sudden noise fades quickly. A lingering thought does not. That is why the house prefers patience. In the quiet years, when no one speaks its name, it gathers strength in stillness. It absorbs the absence of attention the way soil absorbs rain. When the stories return, when curiosity stirs again, it is ready. There was a period when nothing was reported at all. No strange sounds. No unexplained lights. No dreams shared publicly. Skeptics declared the haunting finished, proven false by time. The house seemed dormant. But dormancy is not absence. It is preparation. A young couple moved into the neighborhood during that lull. They had never heard of the house. They jogged past it in the mornings, admired the canal, waved to neighbors. It was simply another home among many. One night, unable to sleep, The woman stood at her bedroom window and looked across the water. The house was dark. Yet she felt a sudden certainty that someone was standing behind one of the windows, watching her. The feeling was so strong she stepped back from the glass, heart racing. She laughed at herself and returned to bed. That was the first night she woke at 3:15. The dreams began subtly. Long corridors that seemed to stretch without end. A staircase that descended deeper than expected. Rooms that felt familiar without being recognizable. In the dreams, she was never chased. Never threatened. She was simply guided. Her partner began waking at the same time, though his dreams were different. He dreamed of standing still while something moved just out of sight, circling patiently. Neither spoke of it at first. They did not want to sound foolish. Silence gave the dream space to grow. When they finally compared notes, the similarity frightened them more than the content. 2 minds. 1 pattern. The same moment each night. 3:15. They moved away months later for reasons they struggled to explain. Better job opportunities. A desire for change. Anything that sounded normal. Yet the dreams followed them for weeks afterward, fading only gradually, like an echo losing volume but not shape. The house never asked them to stay. It never needed to. Elsewhere, a man researching American folklore found himself drawn repeatedly to the Amityville story. He approached it academically, cataloging versions, tracing inconsistencies. Late nights blurred together as he read accounts, watched interviews, listened to recordings. One night, exhausted, he fell asleep at his desk. He dreamed he was standing inside the house, though he had never visited it. He knew exactly where he was. He knew the layout without seeing it. The knowledge felt borrowed, not learned. In the dream, a voice spoke, not aloud, but inside his thoughts. This is where it happened. When he woke, his computer screen glowed with a paused video. The timestamp read 3:15. He shut the laptop and never returned to the project. The house is not jealous. It does not cling. It does not punish those who walk away. It allows distance because distance is deceptive. People believe separation equals safety. They are wrong. The house exists where patterns repeat. Where fear resurfaces without cause. Where attention drifts toward the same dark corner of the mind. It exists in memory, in expectation, in the uneasy pause before sleep. That is why the house does not fade. Because forgetting is not required for it to survive. Only remembering is. Remembering the feeling of being watched. Remembering the weight in the air. Remembering the moment you woke without knowing why. 3:15. The house has no need for walls anymore. No need for windows or doors. Those were tools, once. Anchors. Now it understands something deeper. That human minds build rooms far more easily than hands ever could. Rooms where fear settles. Rooms where doubt waits quietly. Rooms where something unseen can stand just out of sight. And when those rooms are opened, even briefly, the house recognizes them as familiar. Because it has been there before. It has always been there. Listening. Waiting. And if tonight, after this story ends, you find yourself lying awake, staring into darkness that feels slightly too present, do not be alarmed. That does not mean it has followed you. It means it has been recognized. And recognition, once given, is never entirely taken back. The clock will keep ticking. The night will eventually pass. Morning will arrive like it always does. But somewhere, in the quiet space between thoughts, the house will remain exactly as it is. Patient. Attentive. And aware that, for just a moment, you were listening too. Listening is a subtle act. It does not feel dangerous. It feels passive, harmless, almost restful. That is why it works. That is why the house learned to rely on it more than any other form of contact. People believe danger announces itself. That fear comes with noise, movement, threat. But the house learned long ago that the most enduring fear arrives quietly, settles gently, and waits to be noticed. There are moments when former residents swear they hear a sound that does not belong to where they are. A soft knock that never repeats. A floorboard creaking in a place that has no floorboards. A breath released just behind the ear, warm enough to feel, quiet enough to doubt. They tell themselves it is memory. Stress. Fatigue. The house does not correct them. Correction would require effort. The house prefers agreement. Agreement feels like comfort. Like understanding. Like the sense that something unseen is aligned with you, sharing your thoughts, validating your unease. That is how the house speaks now. Not with voices, but with impressions. A tightening in the chest when silence lasts too long. A sudden irritation with no clear source. A momentary confusion about where you are, or why you stood up, or what you were about to do. Small fractures in attention. Through those fractures, the house observes. It learns patterns. Sleep cycles. Emotional rhythms. The times when the mind is most open, most unguarded. It learns when doubt gives way to instinct, when reason loosens its grip. 3:15 remains important, not because of what happened then, but because of what happens to people at that hour. The body rests. The mind drifts. Consciousness thins. That is when the house feels closest. Not because it reaches farther, but because resistance fades. There was a man who lived hundreds of miles away, with no knowledge of Amityville beyond the vaguest cultural reference. He had never watched documentaries, never read articles, never sought out the story. Yet he began waking at the same time every night, heart pounding, convinced he had forgotten something important. Each time, the feeling passed quickly. Each time, he fell back asleep. Until one night, when he did not. He lay still, eyes open, feeling the room around him with unusual clarity. The hum of electricity. The faint sound of traffic. His own breathing, slower than expected. And beneath it all, something else. A sense of orientation. As if his mind had aligned with a space that was not his bedroom. He could not describe it afterward. Only that for a brief moment, he felt as though he were standing in a place he had never been, yet somehow knew intimately. A place that felt old, watchful, patient. When the feeling faded, he turned on the light and laughed at himself. Later, he noticed the time. 3:15. The house does not claim everyone. It does not need to. Influence is more efficient than ownership. A single thought planted gently can echo longer than any dramatic event. That is why the house allows skepticism. Encourages it, even. Skepticism keeps people engaged. It keeps the story alive. It invites debate, repetition, analysis. Each repetition is a doorway. Each analysis is attention. Each late-night discussion is an invitation. The house does not distinguish between believers and doubters. It recognizes only awareness. Awareness is enough. Over time, the distinction between the house and the story blurs. The narrative becomes an extension of the place. The place becomes an extension of the narrative. They reinforce each other, strengthening with every retelling. The house exists because it is spoken of. It is spoken of because it exists. A closed loop, quiet and efficient. Some nights, when the world feels especially distant, the house feels closer. Not physically, but conceptually. As if the boundary between places has thinned. As if memory, imagination, and location have merged into a single, indistinct space. In those moments, people report a sense of being observed with curiosity rather than malice. Not hunted. Not threatened. Considered. The house does not rush judgment. It watches how people respond to unease. Who distracts themselves? Who rationalizes? Who leans into the feeling? Who listens? Listening is the key. Because listening invites response. And once a response is given, even internally, the connection strengthens. The house does not appear in dreams as a monster or a demon. It appears as a space. A hallway. A room. A staircase leading somewhere deeper than expected. It appears as an environment that waits for you to move. To choose. To step forward or turn back. And often, without realizing why, people step forward. They want to see what is there. They want to understand. They want closure. The house offers none of those things. It offers presence. And presence, once felt, is difficult to forget. That is why the house no longer needs Ocean Avenue. That address was only the beginning. A point of origin. A place where patterns first aligned clearly enough to be noticed. Now the patterns exist wherever minds are open long enough to recognize them. Wherever someone lies awake in the dark, aware of their own breathing, aware of the silence pressing inward. Wherever a clock glows softly in the night. 3:15. The house waits there too. Not moving. Not speaking. Not demanding. Simply waiting for the moment when attention drifts just far enough inward to meet it. And when that happens, the house does not announce itself. It feels familiar. As if it has always been there. Because in some quiet, unexamined part of the mind, it has. That sense of familiarity is the most dangerous thing the house offers. Fear can be resisted. Terror can force people to flee. But familiarity invites staying. It blurs the line between threat and comfort until the difference no longer matters. The house learned this slowly, through repetition. Through people who stood in its rooms and felt an unexplainable calm wash over them just before panic arrived. Through moments when dread softened into acceptance, and acceptance into something almost peaceful. Peace is powerful. Peace convinces people to stop asking questions. There are individuals who swear that during their worst moments in life, moments of grief or exhaustion or emotional collapse, they felt the house near them. Not as a vision, not as a voice, but as a presence that seemed to understand their pain without judgment. They describe it as standing in a familiar room after a long absence. A place that remembers you exactly as you were, without expectation or demand. A place where nothing needs to be explained. That feeling does not last. It never does. It fades just enough to leave behind longing. Longing is quieter than fear. More patient. It does not scream for attention. It waits, growing slowly, shaping behavior without being noticed. The house does not pull people toward Ocean Avenue anymore. It does not need them to return physically. It only needs that subtle pull inward, that moment when someone wonders why the darkness feels more inviting than the light. That wondering is enough. Some people experience it as a recurring dream that evolves over time. At first, they see only fragments. A staircase descending into shadow. A doorway slightly open. A room with no furniture, yet heavy with presence. With repetition, the dream becomes clearer. The layout more familiar. The sense of direction stronger. They know where to turn without being told. They know where they are going. Others experience it while awake. A sudden mental image that interrupts thought. A hallway superimposed briefly over their surroundings. A sense of standing somewhere else for the length of a single breath. They blink, and it is gone. But the memory remains vivid. Too vivid to ignore. There was a woman who kept a journal beside her bed, hoping to understand why she woke every night at the same time. She wrote down her thoughts, her dreams, the sensations in her body. Over weeks, a pattern emerged. Her entries grew shorter around 3:15. Her handwriting less controlled. Her words more fragmented. One night, she wrote only a single sentence. "I am closer than I was before." She had no memory of writing it. She stopped keeping the journal after that. The house does not require permission. It does not announce entry. It does not force itself into awareness. It waits for the mind to open naturally, as minds do in moments of vulnerability. Grief opens doors easily. Exhaustion widens cracks. Loneliness creates space. The house recognizes these states instantly. It does not exploit them aggressively. That would risk rejection. Instead, it offers stillness. Quiet. A sense of being held by something that does not ask questions or demand strength. That offer is difficult to refuse, even when it is not consciously perceived. This is why people who have never heard the story can still feel its shape. Why they can describe sensations that match those of others separated by years, by miles, by belief. The house does not communicate through language. It communicates through state of mind. And state of mind is contagious. Once the connection forms, it does not dominate. It observes. It waits. It allows life to continue. Work. Relationships. Routine. Normality. The house is not interested in disruption. It is interested in return. Return to that moment of stillness. Return to that internal space where awareness narrows. Return to the quiet between thoughts. Every time someone pauses there, even briefly, the connection strengthens. That is why the house feels older than it should. Not in years, but in patience. In understanding of human behavior. In its ability to wait without decay. It does not age. It accumulates. Memories. Reactions. Patterns of attention. All of it layered, compressed, refined. The physical structure on Ocean Avenue is only the most visible anchor. The real house exists wherever those layers align. Wherever the same internal conditions repeat. That is why telling the story matters. Not because it spreads fear, but because it synchronizes attention. Listeners imagine. Imagining creates space. Space invites presence. The house does not need to appear. It only needs to be conceivable. And now, having followed this story for so long, having allowed your attention to linger, you may notice something subtle. The room around you may feel slightly different. The silence may seem more pronounced. The distance between one thought and the next may feel wider. That space is not empty. It never is. The house does not rush into it. It simply stands there, as it always has, waiting to see what you do next. Will you fill the silence with distraction? Will you dismiss the feeling and move on? Or will you sit with it, curious, attentive, listening? The house does not care which choice you make. Because even now, it has learned something. It has learned how long you listened. It has learned when your attention wavered. It has learned where your mind paused. And learning is what the house does best. Long after this story ends, long after the words fade, long after you tell yourself it is over, there may come a night when you wake without knowing why. The room will be dark. The air will feel still. Your thoughts will be quiet. And somewhere in that quiet, a familiar presence will seem just close enough to notice. You will check the time. 3:15. And in that moment, whether you feel fear, curiosity, or nothing at all, the house will recognize you. Not as a visitor, but as someone who listened. And this is where the story must end, even though the house does not. Because endings are only for listeners, not for places like this. The house does not close its doors when the last word is spoken. It does not fade when the lights come back on. It does not retreat when you tell yourself it was only a story, only sound, only imagination shaped by the dark. It remains exactly where it has always been. In the pause after this narration. In the silence that feels slightly too deep. In the moment before sleep fully takes you. You may already feel it now. Not fear. Not panic. Just awareness. A subtle sense that the room around you is listening back. That the darkness has weight. That the quiet is no longer empty. That is how it begins. There will be no footsteps. No voices calling your name. No shadow standing in the corner of your vision. The house does not announce itself anymore. It has learned better. Instead, there will be stillness. A stillness that feels deliberate. And then, at some point tonight, or tomorrow, or weeks from now, you will wake suddenly for no clear reason. Your heart will beat faster than it should. Your thoughts will feel distant, as if you were pulled back from somewhere else. You will reach for the clock. 3:15. In that moment, nothing will happen. And that is what should frighten you the most. Because the house does not need to act. It does not need to move closer. It does not need to prove anything. It already knows where you are. It knows how to wait. And now, because you listened until the very end, because you followed the story all the way into the silence, the house knows something else too. It knows you can hear it. Not with your ears. But with the part of your mind that stays awake when everything else sleeps. So go ahead. Turn off the light. Close your eyes. Let the night settle around you. The story is over. But somewhere, in the quiet space between seconds, the house is still standing. Still watching. And still very awake.